From my armchair, I watched the nightmare unfold across the street. I saw them kick in the door at Don Isabella Thorne and her thugs. Through my binoculars, I could see the terror on young Clara's face, her body still weak from bringing a child into the world just days before. They ripped the newborn from her arms, calling her unstable as a camera recorded her sobs. They brandished a piece of paper they called a court order, their faces masks of smug, absolute power. They thought they were untouchable. Well, they didn't. Know that the old man in the window across the street wasn't just a spectator. He was a general who had just found his army, and their attack was the first shot in a war I had been planning for 10 years. My name is Arthur Vance, and for the last 10 years my world has been my garden and the quiet hum of the Meadowlands estate. The scent of roses I so carefully tend to is the only sweetness left in my days. The rest is observation. From my armchair by the bay window, I have a clear, unobstructed view of the street. This vantage point has become both my sanctuary and my prison, a comfort and a curse. It's a comfort because it's all I have left of the world. Curse. Because it forces me to watch, day in and day out, the slow, orderly procession of life in a kingdom ruled by a tyrant. My mantelpiece, gathering a thin layer of dust I can't bring myself to wipe away, sits a single framed photograph of my son Thomas. It was taken on the day he launched his landscaping business. He stands before his new truck, beaming, his eyes full of a hope so bright it hurts to look at now. That hopeful smile is a ghost I chase in my dreams, a smile I haven't seen in person since Isabella Thorne decided his ambition was an affront to her authority. He didn't just lose his business. She bled it dry with 1,000 cuts fiends for grass clippings on the sidewalk. Citations for starting his mower 5 minutes too early, complaints about the unapproved shade of his work uniforms. She dismantled his dream, then his spirit. The light went out of his eyes long before his heart stopped beating. He lost his home, and finally, he lost his life, all because he dared to thrive in the shadow of the queen of our little kingdom. Isabella Thorne is the president of our Homeowners Association, but that title is a pale description of her power. Her cruelty is not a flaw. It is a scalpel, a finely tuned instrument of power she wields with surgical precision to dissect the happiness of anyone who forgets their place. When the young couple, Ethan and Clara Miller, moved into the 2-bedroom bungalow across the street, it was like watching a ghost of the past walk into the present. I saw in them the same bright, untarnished hope my Thomas once had, a hope this neighborhood specializes in extinguishing. They were escaping a life of constant military relocations, a world of discipline and transience, seeking the simple, quiet peace I had long since lost. Clara was already showing her pregnancy, a gentle curve to her belly, and they spent there. First weekend painting the spare room a soft, hopeful yellow that I could see from my window. It was a beacon of light against the encroaching shadows. I baked a batch of my late wife's famous brownies. The recipe is one of the few things I have left of her, and walked across the street. I offered them the plate and some gentle, unsolicited advice about dealing with the stubborn dandelions on the lawn. But behind my friendly words, a silent scream was building. What I really wanted to say was, run, sell this house, and never look back. But how do you tell that to people who have just found their dream? As I spoke to them, I saw a flicker of movement from the second-floor window of Isabella's sprawling McMansion on the hill. She was watching them, not with neighborly curiosity, but with the cold, calculating gaze of a predator sizing up new prey. She saw their happiness, their hope, and their beautiful new beginning, not as something to be welcomed, but as something to be consumed. The harassment began subtly, as it always does, a slow poison administered in small doses. The first notice appeared tucked under their doormat, a crisp, white envelope bearing the HOA's embossed seal. Their crime, cheerful garden gnome, a housewarming gift, was deemed an unapproved lawn ornament. A few weeks later, another fine arrived, this time for using the wrong brand of mulch in their flower beds. I watched from my window as Ethan, ever the diplomat, approached Isabella at the annual HOA barbecue. He was polite, his posture respectful, trying to find common ground. I saw Isabella look him up and down, her eyes cold and dismissive, before turning away mid-sentence with a flick of her wrist. She didn't see a neighbor. She saw a subject to be brought to heel. I knew then, with a familiar ache in my chest, that this was just the overture, the first few discordant notes of a tragic symphony I had heard before. The real attack came on a crisp autumn afternoon. Sleek black sedan, the kind that whispers of money and intimidation, pulled up to their curb. A man in an expensive suit, a Mr. Sterling, emerged with a leather briefcase and a predatory smile. He presented them with a generous offer for their house a figure. So insulting, it was clearly designed to demoralize, not to negotiate. I had seen this play before. It was Isabella's signature move. A pincer attack of psychological warfare and corporate aggression, backed by her powerful lawyer husband and his web of shell companies. When Ethan, his voice no longer pleading but firm with a soldier's resolve, refused the offer, I looked towards the mansion on the hill. Just as Mr. Sterling's car pulled away, I saw the curtain in Isabella's window twitch. It was a minuscule movement, almost imperceptible, but I knew what it meant. The war had officially begun. The violation notices became a deluge, a psychological assault designed to break them. They were fined for their garbage can being visible from the street for 2 hours after pickup, for a barely visible crack in the driveway for the soft yellow glow of the nursery being visible at night. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, and it was working on Clara. I watched the light dim in her eyes. She stopped taking her evening walks. The doctor had warned her about stress, about her blood pressure, but how could she rest when a tyrant was prowling outside her window? Ethan, however, was different from my gentle Thomas. My son had tried to reason to appease. Ethan did not. I saw the soldier in him take over. His anger didn't explode. It froze. It became cold, methodical, and disciplined. He bought a thick ledger and began documenting every interaction, every fine, with the precision of an after-action report. He took photos, dated, and time-stamped. He was building a case. This was my chance. One afternoon, as I was pruning my roses, I saw him at his mailbox, staring at another white envelope with a grim set to his jaw. I ambled over. "Nasty business," I said, nodding at the letter. "You know, for an organization so concerned with rules, they're often quite sloppy with their own books. It's all public record, of course. A man with your attention to detail might find them, ... illuminating." I left it at that. A week later, a van arrived. I watched them install a comprehensive security system. Not just a doorbell camera, but high-definition domes covering every angle, and a few tiny, nearly invisible cameras in the eaves, pointing not at his own property, but directly at the street, with a perfect commanding view of Isabella's house. I knew then this wasn't just for the baby. This was counter-surveillance. Ethan wasn't just defending, he was preparing to attack. The day they brought their daughter Lily home from the hospital was a sliver of pure, fragile peace. I watched. From my window, as Ethan carried the tiny car seat with a reverence I knew well, Clara leaning on him, exhausted but radiant. For 24 hours, the house across the street was a bubble of quiet joy. It was a peace so profound it felt like a target. And then at dawn the next day, the bubble burst. I was woken not by the birds, but by a sound that ripped through. The morning sharp, splintering crack, like a bone breaking. My heart seized. I didn't need to look, but I did. I grabbed my binoculars from the windowsill, my hands already trembling. The Millers' cheerful blue front door was hanging from a single hinge, a gaping wound in their new life. And on their porch, surveying her handiwork like a monarch, stood Isabella Thorne. She wore a pristine pantsuit, a splash of crimson lipstick. Her only color, her expression, one of utter, triumphant satisfaction. Flanking her were 3 hired brutesmen, too large for their cheap suits, their faces blank and thuggish. And to their side, a weaselly man held a professional video camera, its red recording light blinking like a malevolent eye. This wasn't just an attack, it was a performance. I felt a dread so cold it was like ice water in my veins. This was it. The final, most vicious move in her playbook, the one she used to break people completely. I watched them storm into the house, A guttural sound of rage and grief escaped my throat, a sound for my Thomas and for this new family. My hands shook, not from weakness, but from the sheer impotent fury of a man forced to watch a tragedy he had long foreseen. And then, as if on cue, the strobing red and blue lights painted the street. The sheriff's deputies arrived, not with urgency, but with a calm deliberateness that told me everything. This was Isabella's insurance policy, her masterstroke. She hadn't just attacked them, she had already called the law, twisting the story to paint herself as the rescuer and Ethan as the monster. My binoculars were pressed so hard against my face they left marks. I watched the deputies drag Ethan out, his face a mask of cold fury, and slap handcuffs on his wrists. He didn't resist. He was a soldier, and he knew this was a battle he couldn't win with force. Then I saw them wheel the gurney towards the broken door, ready to take Clara and her newborn. This was Isabella's checkmate. My stomach churned with a decade of suppressed rage. But then the script changed. Out of nowhere, an unmarked black van and 2 county SWAT trucks screeched to a halt, boxing in the sheriff's cars. The men who emerged were different. They moved with a fluid, terrifying efficiency that the local deputies lacked. They weren't cops playing soldier, they were soldiers. Their matte black vests were stamped with navy and bold yellow. This was Ethan's countermove. It was a breathtaking, perfectly executed reversal. One of them, clearly the leader, ripped the phony court order from a bewildered deputy's hand, glanced at it, then showed the deputy a screen on his phone. "This is a live feed from inside the house." I imagined him saying, his voice dangerously calm, "And this is a forgery." The world turned right side up. The cuffs came off Ethan's wrists with a soft click and were promptly snapped onto Isabella's. Smug satisfaction evaporated, replaced by slack-jawed disbelief, which then curdled into a look of pure venomous hatred directed right at Ethan. For the first time in 10 years, a genuine, unburdened feeling swelled in my chest. It was a surge of pure, unadulterated triumph. Justice. Not just for the Millers, for my Thomas. The triumph was short-lived, a flicker of light before a deeper darkness. Isabella was out on bail the next day. Her husband's law firm, a machine, built on intimidation and loopholes, posted a 7-figure bond as if it were pocket change. And the charges were immediately buried under a mountain of legal jargon about civil disputes. Then came the second wave of the assault, the one my Thomas never had to face. It was a war for public opinion. Local news blog, known for its sensationalism, published an article with the headline, "Local Hero HOA President Attacked by Unstable Veteran." It was a masterpiece of character assassination. It quoted anonymous neighbors who described Ethan's quiet, reserved nature as threatening and aggressive. His decorated military service was twisted into a narrative of PTSD and instability. Clara's very normal postpartum exhaustion was spun into severe mental fragility. The house across the street, which had briefly tasted freedom, went dark again. The curtains were drawn. The cheerful yellow of the nursery now seemed like a cruel joke. I saw the despair return to them, heavier and more suffocating than before. That night, a slow, hesitant knock came at my door. It was Ethan, the soldier, was gone. In his place was a man hollowed out by a fight he didn't understand. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes, which had held such cold fire, were now just empty. "She's going to win, isn't she?" he whispered, the words barely audible. "They're all listening to her. We should just go." He looked broken, not by the physical threats, but by the insidious poison of lies. He was a man trained to fight enemies he could see, not shadows that turned his own neighbors against him. In his defeat, I saw the echo of my son's final days. That was when I knew the time had come. The game of gentle hints and subtle nudges was over. This was no longer about nudging an ally. This was about saving a life. "I haven't been entirely honest with you, son," I said, my voice quiet in the still room. I poured 2 glasses of the good whiskey, the one I save for ghosts and grim necessities. I pushed one across the table to him. He just stared at it. I took a slow breath, the scent of old paper and dust filling my lungs. "To understand what you're up against, You need to understand why I'm still here. I told him everything then. I spoke of my Thomas, not as a tragic figure, but as a good, hard-working boy who made the mistake of succeeding in Isabella's line of sight. I described the petty fines that became crippling debts, the way she turned neighbors against him, the slow, systematic dismantling of his life until the shame became too much to bear. My voice didn't crack. It was a story I had recited to myself in the dark 1,000 times, and the pain had long since hardened into a cold, heavy stone in my gut. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Then I confessed. My guidance, my neighborly advice, it wasn't random. For 10 years since the day I buried my boy, I've been watching her. I've been gathering information, piece by piece. A pathetic one-man army waiting for a battle I couldn't start. I was a general without a soldier. Then you came, saw it in you from the first day. You have the fire my Thomas lacked. The training, I knew you were the ally I'd been waiting for. I walked to the old oak desk that had been my wife's, unlocked a bottom drawer that hadn't been opened in years, and retrieved a small, worn, leather-bound book. I placed it on the table between us. The leather was cracked, the gold lettering. On its spine long faded. Your cameras, your digital evidence, that's good. But you're fighting a modern war against an ancient evil. You missed the one thing she would never digitize, the one thing she thinks is buried forever. This is her father's handwritten ledger. Decades of blackmail, extortion, payoffs, ... The original sins that built this kingdom. This is her power. And this, I said, tapping the book, is how we burn it all to the ground. The ledger contained the final piece. The keystone to her entire corrupt empire, leverage over the district attorney himself. We paged through the dusty book under the dim light of my desk lamp. The spidery handwriting detailing a decades-old cover-up of a hit-and-run, paid for by Isabella's father to protect the DA's own family. Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. The easy bail, the DA's hesitation, the dismissal of charges as a civil dispute. Our planned digital assault on local systems was not just flawed, it was a death trap. We can't go to the local or state police, Ethan said, his voice now devoid of despair, replaced by a cold, tactical focus. They'll bury this and warn her. We're coming, he was right. We had to go over everyone's head. Our multi-pronged attack was now a single, high-stakes gambit. Get this physical ledger and all of Ethan's digital evidence into the hands of the FBI in Washington, D.C., while Ethan and his elite friend, Spectre, worked their digital magic to establish a secure contact. My role became simpler, more primal. I was the eyes and ears on the ground. We set the trap, not with force, but with psychology. Ethan, lawyer, drafted the most humiliating settlement offer imaginable, a full confession of his instability, a public apology, and an agreement to sell her the house for the original insulting price. It was the perfect bait, designed to be irresistible to a narcissist like Isabella. She wanted more than the house. She wanted his submission. She agreed to a meeting, insisting it be on her turf, the sterile, soulless community center. The night of the meeting was cold and rainy, a fitting backdrop for the final act. I sat in my armchair, the familiar weight of the binoculars in my hands. A secure line opened to the FBI team that was now sitting in a van just down the street. I was there. Overwatch. I watched Ethan walk in alone, a lamb to the slaughter. And I watched Isabella gloat, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. Savoring her victory, completely unaware that every boastful word, every admission of blackmail and conspiracy, was being fed directly to the federal agents listening. On the other end of the wire, Ethan was wearing. The double doors of the community center didn't burst open. There were no sirens, no shouting. It simply swung inward, and a half-dozen men and women in dark blue jackets with 3 gold letters on the back filed into the room. They moved with a calm, deliberate purpose that was far more terrifying than any chaotic raid. The air in the room, thick with Isabella's arrogance, went instantly still. Her 2 goons by the door, who had been standing with their arms crossed, suddenly looked like what they were, cheap, oversized thugs in ill-fitting suits. The lead agent, A tall woman with steel-gray eyes walked right past them, her gaze locked on Isabella. "Isabella Thorne," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion, the sound of a closing ledger. "You are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and extortion," as another agent stepped forward to snap handcuffs onto her. Wrists, the click was almost inaudible, but through my binoculars, I saw the shockwave hit her. Her face, a moment before a mask of triumph, crumbled into slack-jawed disbelief. As they led her out into the rain, her perfect hair now plastered to her scalp, she stopped on the sidewalk. She didn't look at Ethan, the man who had faced her. Down. Her eyes scanned the dark street, searching for an explanation for the source of this impossibility. And then they found my window. They locked onto me. In that moment, I saw the disbelief curdle into a look of pure black hatred. It wasn't just anger. It was the fury of a queen, realizing she'd been checkmated by a pawn she never even knew was on the board. I held her gaze, unflinching. I wanted her to see the ghost who had haunted her reign. After they put her in the car, I reached over and flicked my porch light on and off once. It wasn't a signal to the FBI, it was a eulogy. A final, quiet word in a conversation I'd been having with my son for 10 long years. It's done. For you, Thomas, 6 months later, the air in the Meadowlands estate feels different. It's lighter. The neighborhood is breathing again, a long collective sigh of relief after decades of being suffocated. The federal case against the Thornes was a behemoth, and with the ledger as its cornerstone, their entire rotten structure collapsed. The HOA was dissolved by court order. The corrupt DA resigned in disgrace before he could be indicted. We neighbors, blinking in the sudden sunlight, began talking to each other, not in whispers but in the open. We formed a new voluntary association, one built on mutual respect, not fear. They asked me to be the interim president, a role I accepted with a heavy heart and a sense of duty. Our first official act was not to write new rules, but to tear down an old symbol. The soulless community center was demolished. In its place, with funds and labor donated by families Isabella had victimized over the years, we built a community garden. It's thriving now, full of life. In the very center, where the president's podium used to stand, there is a simple stone bench. It bears a small brass plaque, the words polished by the afternoon sun, in memory of Thomas and all who deserved a better neighbor. I often sit there in the quiet afternoons, the scent of roses replacing the stench of corruption. I watch Ethan across the street, gently rocking his daughter, Lily, on their porch swing. Clara sits beside him, her hand on his, and she's smiling again. Not the tense, fragile smile she wore for months, but a real one, a smile that reaches her eyes and makes them shine. The war is over. I came to understand that peace isn't something you find waiting for you. It's something you build, something you fight for. And sometimes, you have to be willing to burn down the old world to build a new one on the ashes. Looking at that family, whole and safe in their home, I feel the weight of a decade-long vigil finally lift from my shoulders. My watch has ended.